Welcome to this training for assessment supervisors, assistant assessment supervisors, and testers who will be involved in this year's SEA test administration. This year, unlike previous years, the presentation will be conducted virtually due to the COVID-19 constraints and also in adherence to protocols outlined by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. Please listen attentively and adhere to the guidelines and protocols given in this presentation. The secondary entrance assessment includes three components: the English language arts writing, which is administered for 50 minutes, the mathematics, which is administered for 75 minutes, and the English language arts, which is administered for 75 minutes. The assessments must be administered in this order. The secondary entrance assessment, or the SEA, is constructed and scored by CXC. The ELA writing is scored out of 20 marks, whereas the mathematics is scored out of 90 and the English language arts scored out of 80 marks. There is no break between the ELA writing and mathematics. However, there is a 30-minute break between mathematics and English language arts. What are some of the guiding principles for the administration of the SEA? All persons involved in administration of the SEA must follow the guidelines as outlined in the Supervisors and Testers Manual. A soft copy will be sent to all examination personnel. This presentation, however, should not take the place of reading your manual. All COVID-19 protocols as outlined by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education must be followed. This must be in keeping with the guidelines disseminated by the Ministry of Education re the opening of schools. And all personnel are advised to please get a copy of the guidelines and become familiar with the contents. Examination centers. Resident schools are used as the examination centers, except where the school supervisor would have indicated otherwise. Private candidates or homeschoolers are assigned to a center or school in their education district. The examination center staff. All examination centers must be staffed as follows. There's a center manager, who is normally the principal of the school, an assessment supervisor, an assistant assessment supervisor, and then we have our testers. We'll now look closely at the functions and responsibilities of examination personnel. The center manager. The center manager ensures the best internal and external examination conditions for students are in place. So for example, they will ensure that there is sufficient furniture, that there is adequate ventilation and lighting, that the noise level at businesses nearby is controlled, and generally principals would collaborate with businesses prior to the day of the assessment to ensure that the noise level is controlled. They will ensure that there is a reliable supply of water, and also that all charts and other teaching resources are removed. The center manager provides materials for the smooth administration of the SEA at his school. So for example, providing clocks, markers, glue, tape, staplers, scissors, envelopes, and any other stationery item that may be required. He provides separate accommodations for students with special concessions as well. He provides assistance to the assessment supervisor as required. For example, contacting the parents of ill students. He informs the ancillary and security staff of their functions on the day of the administration of the SEA. He also informs the National Schools Dietary Services of the number of meals to be provided. He is in charge of all the COVID-19 protocols to be instituted at the school. For example, the temperature testing, enforcing of wearing of masks, and washing hands on entry. The assessment supervisor. Now, the assessment supervisor is the person who is in charge of the administration of the SEA and takes responsibility for the efficient administration of the SEA on that day. He will collect the SEA package, which is generally a crocus bag, from the designated collection center within the education district. And this is done very early on the morning of the assessment. And he will transport the SEA package from the collection center to the assigned school or center. Now, generally in each district, there are different bases or collection points for the scripts, and your school supervisors in your district will be contacting you as to where you will have to collect your scripts on the morning. The assessment supervisor will open the packages by removing seals in front of witnesses at the center. He will also ensure that no one except the candidates has access to the contents of the test booklets and materials during the assessment. The assessment supervisor ensures candidates are seated one to a desk, where seats are spaced 6 feet apart and numbered as per the attendance register using the birth certificate PIN numbers. He ensures special concession students are to be accommodated in keeping with the instructions as prescribed in writing by the Ministry of Education. There should be no deviation from the instructions given. He assigns a tester in each concession room, even though an officer from the Student Support Services is present. The assessment supervisor will assign duties to his support team. So, for example, he will assign duties such as reading of instructions to candidates, preparation of seating plans, distribution and collection of test booklets, and the completion of SEA forms. He trains his team at his school and center in the procedures of the task assigned, and he monitors the functioning of the assessment personnel. He ensures the prompt commencement of the SEA, also ensures that the correct duration of time for all tests is given and that they are recorded on a board visible to all students. He collects and verifies all completed documents from the assistant assessment supervisor and the testers. And he also verifies all the completed SEA forms 1 to 8. The assessment supervisor also ensures and verifies that all materials are appropriately packaged and sealed in the relevant envelopes and bags. So there are some envelopes that goes into the CXC bags, and then there are some that will go inside the crocus bag for return to the Education District Office. He returns the SEA package with appropriate seals attached to the Education District Office or the base. Now, the assistant assessment supervisor verifies that the SEA package was sealed when delivered to the assessment center. He assists the assessment supervisor with the administration of the examination. For example, verifying the seating of candidates, completing SEA forms 1 to 8 as required, recording on a white or chalkboard the time each test begin and end, performing any other related tasks, and also monitoring the functioning of the testers. The tester or the teacher verifies that SEA package was sealed when delivered to the assessment center, ensures candidates are seated based on the SEA Form 8, which is the attendance register, ensures candidates only bring authorized materials into assessment room, distributes and collects test booklets, distributes labels with students' PIN numbers by double-checking that correct stickers are given to each candidate. The tester reads instructions for tests exactly as stated in the manual. There should be no deviation from the instructions given. The tester answers legitimate queries from candidates, also inspects test booklets that candidates identify as defective, They assist candidates in following directions and also adhere to the order and time limit of the individual tests. The tester monitors students thoroughly during the administration of the SEA. Completes SEA documents as required, such as the seating plan, the tester's report, compensatory time of task form. The tester reports all irregularities to the assessment supervisor or the assistant assessment supervisor. Some of the other key players in the secondary entrance assessment. We have the staff of the Division of School Supervision, where our school supervisors, they act as facilitators for this assessment. The examinations unit is in charge of all the administrative issues. The Division of Educational Research and Evaluation, or the DERE, is in charge of training, monitoring, and evaluation. The Student Support Services Division, they are the facilitators of our special students and concessions. The Division of Curriculum Planning and Development, who assist in the monitoring aspect. The Information and Technology Division, or ICTD, they are in charge of the registration and technology-based activities of placement. And then we have our Communications Division, who is in charge of our public relations. The school supervisor ensures principal completes the environmental checklist. This is done prior to the date of the examination. So they will ensure that the examination rooms have adequate and suitable furniture, lighting, and ventilation, including the concession rooms as well. The supervisors will inform the examination unit of schools that are unsuitable for use as examination centers. They will facilitate the training of the assessment supervisors and the team of assistant assessment supervisors and testers. They assign examination personnel and provides examination unit with a listing of staff at each center. They also distribute and collect at drop-off points all examination materials from the assessment supervisors. They ensure that all materials are packaged for delivery to the examination unit at the end of the assessment. Some of the materials provided to the assessment supervisors prior to the day of the assessment. Supervisors and Testers Manual, the SEA Forms 1 to 8 and the labeled envelopes, labels with students' PIN numbers, the list of candidates for special concessions, and the attendance register. We will now look at some of the SEA forms and materials. SEA forms provided at training will include the Certificate of Identification, Seating Plan, Certificate of Supervision, the Tester's Report, Irregularity Report, the Summary of Return Scripts, the Compensatory Time of Task Form, and the Attendance Registers from CXE. Let us now look at SEA Form 1, which is the Certificate of Identification. Now the SEA Form 1 you have to fill in the school code, the name of the school, and then this form is filled out when the students are being handed over to the assessment supervisors by maybe the principal of the school or maybe the teacher of the school. Whoever is handing over the students to the assessment supervisor, they will sign the form and then the form will be dated. SEA Form 2, the Seating Plan. Now, based on the numbers sitting the assessment at each center, there may be more than one seating plan required. Because if there are students in concession rooms, a separate seating plan has to be done for each concession room. If any child is late and have to be placed in a separate room as well, a separate seating plan has to be done for that child. So for the seating plan, you will fill out the name of the school again, the school code, and an example is given as to how the seating plan should be filled out. So the student PIN numbers will be written in each box. Any student that is absent, an X is written over that box. There are boxes at the front or at the side that you have to indicate where the supervisor's desk was placed and also where the exits and entrances. So this is what the blank form is going to look like, and at the end there will be a signature of the person completing this diagram. Sometimes we'll have our testers, maybe the assistant assessment supervisors, and the form will be dated. Note that this form must be returned in an envelope marked Return of Control Forms. The SEA Form 3, which is a Certificate of Supervision. This form deals with the opening of the Crocus bag and the CXC bag. The two witnesses must sign as ensuring that the seals were intact before opening and that they were opened at an appropriate time. So if we examine the Certificate of Supervision, we will see that the witnesses have to sign, and then the assessment supervisor will also sign and date the form. This form as well, once completed, will be returned in the envelope for the return of control forms. The tester's report, SEA Form 4. This form must be completed by each tester and handed in to the assessment supervisor at the end of the assessment. So the school code, the name of the school, the number of students that the tester was given booklets for, as well as now they have to record the number of test booklets issued to each tester as well as the number of used and unused booklets. So an example is given here, how many for each subject area was received, how many of the booklets were used and returned, and how many were unused booklets. So the testers will provide their name and signature. We also have signatures from our assistant assessment supervisor and our assessment supervisor. And the form is dated and it is returned in the envelope marked Return of Control Forms. SEA Form 5, the Irregularity Report. And I must stress that this is one of the most important forms that has to be filled out on that day. It provides the Ministry of Education with a glance of what actually happened on the day of the assessment at each center without us being there present on the day itself. Now, for the irregularity report, there's the school code, the name of the school, the assessment supervisor's name. The first section provides information on the attendance of the staff. How many were assigned, how many were present, if there were any absent or any late, and if there were any remarks given, you are free to fill them in. So a sample is done here for you. If there was any absent staff, this section here will be filled out as well. Now section B on attendance will look at the students' attendance. Number of students assigned to the school, how many were absent, how many present, if there were any withdrawn or any became ill. And there's a section here for remarks or actions taken as well. If there were any with special concessions as well, that is to be filled out. If there were absent students, this must be documented in the irregularity report by putting in the student's name and number, the reason for absence if it is known, and any remarks that were given. Now we will look at withdrawals. Students who showed up to write the assessment but for one reason or another were removed from the center. If there are any instances of this occurring at your center, this is to be filled out, the student's name and number, reason for withdrawal, and if there are any remarks the assessment supervisor wishes to put in. Now there is a section here for students who arrived at the assessment center late. If there's any child that arrived late at the center, and remember, a child is late for the assessment at 9:31. Once the reading of the instructions begins at 8:30, at 9:31 a child is late. So they will put in the child's name and number. A sample is done here. The time of the arrival, how many time was lost, what action was taken. The student was allowed to sit the examination in a separate room with full time given for all assessments. If there are any students with illnesses, this must be recorded. So you will put in the child's name, their ID number, the nature and duration of the illnesses. So whether the child was vomiting during the ELA writing assessment, whether it took place over a period of 10 minutes, the assessment, number of sections completed, whether the child did in fact complete the assessment fully afterwards, or maybe the child was not able to complete this assessment, then whatever action was taken. Maybe the center manager was notified the student was fit to sit the assessment after the incident and wanted to continue. Compensatory time of 10 minutes was given for time lost. So this is just a sample of what can be written. Now the administration. If there are any issues dealing with the test materials, for example, the test booklets must be recorded here. So for example, if there's a defect with the mathematics script on page 5, supposing there are numbers 21 to 25 missing, you will document that in this column here, and then you will state which students were affected, and the student's name and their PIN number must be documented. What action was taken? A new script was issued and attached to the first script. The student was advised to continue in a new script and not write over what was already completed in the first script issued. And this is very, very important. If a child would have already started some of the questions in the assessment and then realized that the booklet was defective, the assessment supervisor, you must point it out to the child that they are not to write over what they had already completed, but in fact just continue in the new booklet. If there are any other issues related to the operations of the assessment, for example, maybe the SAA control forms or the supervisor's manual, these issues can be documented in this section here. Now the operating schedule at the center on the day. The start and finish time of all the assessment papers will be documented. So for the English language arts writing, for instance, you are documenting when they actually started writing, maybe started at 8:40, they will finish at 9:30. Mathematics, if it begins at 9:40, it ends at 10:55. The English language arts at 11:30, maybe finishing at 12:45. If there were any problems related to the start and finish of any of the assessments, this must be documented right here in this section of the irregularity report. Now, assessment supervisors, what must be noted is that if there are any sections in the irregularity report that does not have any information to fill in, you must write the word nil in any space that is left blank. We do not want any blank areas. Any blank areas you have, you have to write the word nil across those. Accommodation. So you will tick the appropriate boxes, whether there's enough space to physically accommodate a given number of students, if there's an adequate number of seats to allow for one student at a desk, if the special concession students, if any, were accommodated in keeping with the directives of the Ministry of Education. If the response is no to any of the above, please give details below. And this space is provided for such. Any other remarks, example, problems related to lighting, water, toilet, ventilation, street noise, and such, should be documented in this section. Remember, if there were no problems at your center, you're going to fill in nil in this section. Visitors to the center. Now, the authorized personnel. Generally, there will be a monitor visiting each center, and this is the person who will be authorized to visit. You have to put in the person's name here, the purpose, and whatever time they would have spent at the center. If for some reason or the other there was some unauthorized personnel on the premises, this information must also be documented. The name of the person, the purpose, their time arrived, and the action that was taken. If there were any problems related to the assessment process, any incident that was not already recorded on this form that may have affected the flow of the assessment, this is to be recorded in this section. For example, they may say there were too many disturbances due to excessive street noises, indicate if there were any time that was lost, what actions were taken. After this form has been completed, the assessment supervisor will sign, put in the name of the school, and this form must be returned in the envelope marked Return of Control Forms. Please pay attention to this SEA Form 5, the Irregularity Report, as this is the most important document on that day for us. SEA Form 6, the summary of scripts returned. So the school code will be filled out, followed by the school name. And then there's a small table where the number of booklets received for each subject area will be filled in, followed by how many were returned and how many were unused. And this is for the entire center. It will then be signed by the assessment supervisor as well as dated, and it is to be returned in the envelope for the return of control forms. SEA Form 7, the compensatory time off task form. So students who would have lost any time at the assessment, and this can happen for several reasons. Maybe a child would have fallen sick, and this would have probably taken up a little 10 minutes, and the child felt that they could still continue with the assessment. The child must be given back their 10 minutes. Maybe a child would have visited the washroom, and that would have taken 5 minutes. This has to be documented, and the child must be given back their 5 minutes. Maybe the child was in possession of a defective script, and by the time it took to sort out that whole situation, it would have probably taken about 10 minutes. You must give back the child that 10 minutes as well. So there are some examples that are given here. You will put the child's name, the child's PIN number, at what time they became off task, and the ending time as well, how much compensatory time was given, and what was the reason. Please be guided that even though students may say that they don't need to get back the compensatory time, that you must give them their compensatory time. We don't want any children after the assessment saying that they were robbed 5 minutes or they were robbed 10 minutes of an assessment. They must be given the full length of each assessment. The attendance registers from CXC. Now, the attendance registers, there will be 3 copies per subject. So there really is a total of 9 attendance registers. Persons are asked not to cut or tear the pages along the perforated lines unless they have filled out the attendance register. And this is just a sample of what the register will look like. For security reasons, we could not have provided an exact attendance register, but this is what it will look like. So there will be the subject at the top. For English language arts writing, for instance, there are 3 copies. And the material that is used is like a carbon copy. So that is why we are asking and saying not to separate all the English registers until it has been filled out. And once it has been filled out, then it can be separated for packaging in the different spaces. So the students' numbers, their PIN numbers, will be here on the left. You are asked to simply just tick present or absent next to each child's name. If we scroll to the bottom of the form, you have to indicate what was the total number of students present, the total absent. It will be dated, and the person who completes the form will sign as completed. What must be noted with the attendance register is that even though some students may complain and indicate that their name was spelled incorrectly, or maybe their PIN number was incorrect, or maybe you would have noticed that a child's gender was placed in incorrectly, you are not to write on the attendance register. Any information that is incorrect on the attendance register, it will be sorted out after the assessment. So we are saying that the only writing you are doing on the attendance register is ticking off the present or absent and indicating how many were present and absent. There should be no scratching off, no writing over on the attendance register to make changes to any information whatsoever. Some of the other materials provided for the administration of the SCA on the day itself. So you will receive the test booklets for the English language arts writing, for the mathematics, and the English language arts. There will be extra booklets for each subject tested as well. There will be return envelopes which are labeled, right, for scripts by subject areas, for the different SCA forms. There will be seals for the CXC bag and the crocus bag, and then there will be some additional stationery that can be utilized. Now let us investigate some of the administrative or arrangements and activities for the SCA. Now on the day before the SCA, all assessment supervisors and their team must meet at assigned assessment centers to assign tasks and responsibilities to all members of the team. So this will be a good opportunity to determine who will be the reader on the day of the assessment. This will also be utilized to train team members in administration procedures using the manual. We may have some new persons on board who may not be too sure of all the arrangements that are supposed to be in place, so the assessment supervisor will assist in training any members of the team. This is also utilized for verifying that the assessment rooms are conducive to administering the SCA. So on that day, you will ensure that there is proper seating and there is adequate seating, that the lighting is sufficient, that there is proper ventilation, and that all charts have been removed. On this day, you will also ensure that the furniture has been arranged, and remember it is to be placed 6 feet apart, that the candidate PIN numbers are written on the desk and that all charts and other materials have been removed. You will ensure that there are clocks that are visible to all the students on the walls, that there is a whiteboard or a chalkboard to record the time for each test, the start and end time, and also to ensure that there's appropriate area to distribute the snacks. You are to ensure that the rooms are set up according to the criteria set out in the list of concessions for students with special concessions. So in your packages, assessment supervisors, if there are concessions at your center, there will be a list in your package, and you are to verify that the criteria that was meted out from the Ministry of Education, that these criteria have been met in setting up the concession rooms. An extra room is also to be prepared in the event of any late candidate. So here we are looking at some of the activities that will take place when you visit the center on the day prior to the assessment: removing of charts, ensuring that there are clocks on the walls visible to the students, that there's a chalkboard where you write the start and the end time. Seating arrangements, this is just a sample of what can be utilized, ensuring that there is a 6 feet apart from the students, both sideways and from back to front. The seats must be numbered in accordance with the sequential pin numbers on the attendance register. So you must ensure that you follow that order in numbering the students' seats. Now, the only time there may be a deviation from that order is if a student has a special concession. Well, that number will now be utilized in a special concession room, and that's the only time we may have some change to the flow of the attendance register. Now, a strip of masking tape can be used with the pin number written in permanent marker and stuck on the desk, maybe the top right or the top left. That may be easier than using chalk, which can be erased easily. If a child is absent on the day of the assessment, that seat should be left empty. So this is just an example of how the seats can be numbered with the students' full pin numbers. Preparations for administration of the SEA. The SEA package is examined by personnel to ensure that the seal is intact on the crocus bag. This bag is opened before students enter the room once there are 2 witnesses, and this could be either the assistant assessment supervisor and another tester person. The assessment supervisor opens the SEA package in the presence of the assistant assessment supervisor and at least 1 tester. No child is to be used as a witness. SEA Form 3, the Certificate of Supervision, is completed at this time, and we would have looked at this SEA Form 3 previously. The plastic seal around the crocus bag is cut and contents are emptied. The seal to the CXC bag is broken and scripts can be emptied. So there are 2 seals that have to be broken. Scripts are counted to ensure sufficient amounts for each student, as well as extras. Scripts are not to be opened yet. If there are any issues with numbers of scripts, please contact your direct school supervisors. And this can take place actually even before 8 o'clock on the day of the assessment, because you want to ensure that you have enough scripts. So you will look at the number of students assigned to your center, and you will count to see if for each subject area that there's enough scripts as well as extras. The labels with the pin numbers may be separated out and laid out for easy distribution. At this point, the completion of Section 1A, the attendance of staff in SEA Form 5, the irregularity report, can be completed. So there are 2 seals as well inside the bag. So when you open up the bag, there are two seals. There's a small seal and there's a longer seal at the end. Now, these seals must be kept in a safe place for use at the end of the assessment. Do not leave the seals inside of the bag. Now, this blue seal, you've seen there's a code on it, and this is a seal that is used for the CXC bag. Sometimes it's a blue color, sometimes it's a green color. So this will normally be contained in a small brown envelope inside the CXC bag, and you are to remove it on the morning of the assessment and keep it safe to seal the bag at the end of the day. Then there will be either a red or a yellow seal which resembles a tie strap, and this will be used for sealing the caucus bag at the end of the assessment. Admitting candidates to the examination center. Candidates are handed over to assessment supervisor by the teacher or center manager. An SEA Form 1 certificate of identification is completed at this time. Candidates without admission slips may write the assessment only if their names appear on the list of candidates and they are identified by their class teacher or their principal. So the admission slip will contain this information: the school name, the student PIN number, their gender, the date of birth, what is the center number. Candidates are allowed to enter the examination room with a simple ruler, pencils, eraser, sharpener, and admission slip. A calm, welcoming, non-intimidating environment that is conducive to the students' best efforts must be provided by all personnel on that day. Testers must ensure that each candidate is correctly seated by double-checking each candidate's name and PIN number on the attendance register against the number on the desk at which the candidate is seated. The assessment supervisor must record on SEA Form 4, the tester's report, the total number of booklets given to each tester. Issuing test materials. The first bell is rung at 8:30 a.m. and the instructions for the English Language Arts writing test are read. Please refer to page 9 of the manual. So what this means is that the students would have been lined up and brought into the room prior to 8:30 a.m. So depending on the number of candidates that are eligible to sit the assessment at your center, you will have to determine how much time it is going to take to allow the students to be seated for a 8:30 start. The ELA writing booklets and labels are distributed to the candidates. Candidates must check and ensure that all pages of the test booklets are properly printed before the test begins. If for some reason or the other, the child would have already started working and then realized that there are items missing or the booklet is defective in one way or the other, that defective booklet is to be replaced with an extra booklet that was provided. However, students who began the test in a defective booklet are to be guided not to rewrite the completed items. The partially used defective booklet must be attached to the new booklet at all times. A note should be made in the irregularity report of this defective booklet. Also, the child may have lost several minutes in trying to rectify the situation. The number of minutes lost must be recorded on the compensatory time of task form, and the child should be given back any time that was lost in rectifying the situation. Completing the cover page. Only the labels with PIN numbers are to be placed in boxes, one in each box. Do not remove labels if attached in a crooked manner. The students and not the testers are to use the information on the admission slip to complete the cover page. And students are to be guided that there may be instances where the admission slip may have an incorrect spelling or they may have an incorrect birth pin. The students are to use the information on the admission slip to fill out the cover. Their information will be rectified by CXC after the assessment. Students are also to be guided not to detach the tear off portion at the front of the script. Testers are to ensure candidates complete cover pages on the 3 booklets. No one other than candidates should examine the content of the test booklets. The examination of the contents of the test booklets is only allowed when a child raises a query and the assessment supervisor or the tester will have to investigate the booklet. All unused booklets must be kept closed in the possession of the assessment supervisor but in full view of others. The assessment supervisor must not be in an isolated room with the scripts. All instructions and time limits are to be observed as specified. 50 minutes for the ELA writing, 75 minutes for mathematics, and 75 minutes for the English language arts paper. The 3 copies of the attendance register for ELA writing are completed. Testers should not stand over candidates, especially for prolonged periods of time. The use of cell phones during the testing period is prohibited by all. There should be no calls, no text messages, or any photographs being taken. Testing personnel should also avoid sitting behind the students they are supervising. They should avoid reading of any books or newspapers, avoid excessive talking among themselves, avoid walking about regularly, and avoid the overcrowding of room with testers. A late student must be placed in a separate room and given full time for each assessment. Remember, a child is considered late up to 1 hour after the assessment has begun. So the reading of the instructions would have begun at 8:30 and a child is considered late up to 9:30. Any period after 9:30 a.m., that child will now be considered as an absent student. Any late student, their information should be recorded in the Irregularity Report SCA Form 5. The compensatory time is recorded on SCA Form 7, the compensatory time of task form. So remember, now the child must be given back their full time for each assessment, even though they would have arrived late. The SCA Form 2, the seating plan, is completed. Several seating plans are to be completed to cater to the different rooms. Relevant sections in the Irregularity Report are filled out during the administration of the test. Completed test booklets are now collected and placed in an alphabetical order in the designated labeled return envelope. And this is now bringing the ELA writing assessment to an end. The mathematics assessment follows right after with no break. The procedure for the mathematics and English languages are conducted in a similar manner according to the manual. The assessment supervisor has full responsibility for the security of the examination at his center. All non-examination personnel, parents and visitors must leave the compound 10 minutes before the start of the examination. Unauthorized persons must not be on the school compound during the 30-minute break. Any breach of security must be recorded on the SCA Form 5 Irregularity Report form by the assessment supervisor. Return of test materials. So we'll first look at how we are packaging the test materials. Place the completed test booklets for each subject in alphabetical order in the designated envelope. Attach one copy of the attendance register on the outside of the envelope for the relevant subject. Remember, the unused booklets are not to be packaged together with the completed test booklets. So this is an example of what the envelope will look like, and this is the envelope for the return of the English language arts writing scripts. So the scripts are to be placed in alphabetical order inside the envelope, and the relevant information filled out on the outside. The school code, the name of the school, the number of test scripts used, and the number of test scripts unused, and we will have relevant signatures. What must be noted is that the envelopes must be sealed, and please seal the envelopes with white glue. You are not to use any glue sticks as these come apart very easily, and we are not to use any tape. So we want to use glue when we are sealing the envelopes. This is the envelope for the mathematics scripts, the envelopes for the English language arts scripts. The assessment supervisor and the assistant assessment supervisor or a tester should sign diagonally across both sealed flaps of envelopes containing the scripts for each subject. Place envelopes with completed scripts for the ELA writing, the mathematics, and English language arts inside the CXC bag and attach the seal. So this is a sample of how we should have the signatures going across the flaps of the envelopes after they have been sealed. These are samples of the CXC bags. Depending on the number of students at your center, your bag may look like this smaller bag, or in some cases, some schools would require the larger bag. After the scripts, the completed scripts have been placed in the envelopes, they are now being placed in the CXC bag. And once they are placed in the CXC bag, it is zipped and a seal has to be placed. Now, if you look carefully at the seal, there is a direction in which the seal has to be placed. And on the bag itself, if you look at the blue tag, it shows you the direction in which the seal should be put in. Return booklets of absent candidates for each subject area with the unused or extra booklets in an envelope. Remember, these are not to be placed in the CXC bag, so these will be placed in a special envelope. Return the following in the envelope marked Return of Control Forms. So all the completed SCA forms are to be placed in the Return of Control Forms envelope. You must ensure that all the SCA forms are completed and signed. A duplicate copy of the attendance register from CXC must be completed for each subject. Remember, there are 3 copies of the attendance registers. 1 copy of each subject must be attached to the outside of the envelope in which the scripts are being returned. 1 copy for each subject will be placed in the envelope for the return of control forms, and then the last copy of each subject area will be placed in an envelope to be handed in to your school supervisor, and this is to be delivered by hand and not to be placed in any envelope. And this is the sample of the return of control forms envelope. You will fill out the relevant information, tick off once you have put in the relevant control forms, date and sign. Return the following in an envelope marked Extra Materials. They are unused booklets, any other stationery. The 2 envelopes with the return of control forms and all other extra materials must be bound together. Place the CXC bag and all other envelopes and materials inside the crocus bag and attach the seal. The triplicate copy of the attendance register is to be submitted to the school supervisor in a separate envelope by hand and not to be placed in the bag. So we would have looked at the CXC bag previously. So the CXC bag and all the other envelopes now are to be placed inside the crocus bag. And now this seal, which is like a tie strap, is to be used to seal the bag. So from the morning, the crocus bag would have already have a hole at the top center, and you are to take the seal, pass it through that hole and wrap it round a few times before actually pulling it through to seal the bag. Special concessions. Special rooms must be provided for candidates granted special concessions. Principals must inform parents and students of conditions implied with concessions granted. Concessions rooms should be arranged in a manner that will not disturb other candidates. Assessment supervisors must inform monitors of candidates granted special concessions. Concessions not granted by the concession committee cannot be allowed by the assessment supervisor. Directions, especially the time that is allotted to these candidates, should be followed exactly. Monitoring the administration of the SEA. Monitors are Ministry of Education personnel assigned to observe the administration of the assessment and also to provide feedback, which in turn will contribute to the overall improvement in the administration of the SEA. The assessment starts at 8:30 a.m. with the first bell being rung and the reading of instructions. Refer to page 9 of the manual. Therefore, students must be seated before the start of the assessment at 8:30 a.m. Scripts and labels are then shared out. The timing of each examination, whether it be 50 or 75 minutes, however, only begins when students are told to begin writing, not at 8:30 a.m. when the instructions are being read. A candidate is late if he or she arrives at the center anytime within 1 hour of the start of the assessment. So the assessment should begin at 8:30 a.m. so a student is late up to 9:30 a.m. After this time, the child is considered absent. Late students would be assigned to a separate room. A separate seating plan is done for the student, and this should be noted in the irregularity report. Students visiting the bathroom during the exam should be given compensatory time in keeping with the time loss. This must be recorded on SCA Form 7, the compensatory time of task form provided. Candidates are not to leave the school compound during the 30-minute break and interact with outside personnel. Exam personnel must not be assigned to schools where relatives are writing the assessment. There must not be any photocopying, scanning, taking of photos, or in any way duplicating of the examination scripts. The assessment supervisor should ensure that no one other than students examine the inside or contents of the scripts. Examination personnel is only allowed to do so if a query is made by a student and it should be used to verify any issues. If a child is absent, this must be reflected on the attendance register and recorded on SCA Form 5, the irregularity report. The center manager or principal will inform the examinations unit of the Ministry of Education no later than August 26, 2020 of any student who has to sit the SCA supplemental examination. We will now look at some of the frequently asked questions. Does the actual assessment begin at 8:30 a.m.? So I will reiterate, at 8:30 a.m. the instructions will be read, followed by distribution of the stickers and the ELA writing scripts. So the actual timing of the examinations may begin at approximately maybe at 8:40 a.m. The students may be told to begin writing. This is where the timing will begin. Now the actual start time may vary from center to center. The timing of the assessment begins when the students start writing. So if the ELA writing begins at 8:40, we count on 15 minutes after 8:40, which will bring us to 9:30, and that will be the ending of the ELA writing assessment. What should be done if a child arrives after 9:30 a.m.? At this point, the child would not be able to sit the examination. However, the center manager must inform the school supervisor of situation and the relevant procedures followed for eligibility to sit the makeup assessment. The assessment supervisor will make a note in the irregularity report of such a situation. What should be done in the case of a child falling ill? Scenario 1. The time the child fell ill should be recorded. The child should be escorted to the center manager's office where the parent will be contacted. If it is deemed that the child is still fit to sit the examination after a few minutes, then the child will return to the assessment room and will be given compensatory time for any time lost. This will be recorded on the compensatory time of task form as well as noted in the irregularity report. Scenario 2. A child who falls ill but cannot continue with the assessment. The time the child fell ill should be recorded. The child should be escorted to the center manager's office in a discreet manner where the parent will be contacted. If it is deemed that the child cannot continue, then the parents must formally write and state that they are withdrawing the child from the assessment. And this should be done before the parent leaves with the child from the school's compound. This must be documented in the irregularity report as well. The child's incomplete script will still be packaged with the completed scripts. Now we must be wary when a child falls ill, and we are aware that currently we are faced with the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. And any instance of illness, we may tend to believe that the child is a suspected case of COVID-19. Now, we must be wary of the fact that if we were to create any panic in our student population, it can affect their state of mind during the assessment. So whenever a child falls ill, we will discreetly take them to the center manager's office and we will treat with the situation from there. But we should not create any panic in our testers or even in our student population. Can the parent of a child who has to receive medication during the day wait on the school compound? Now, we are quite aware that there are students who have to receive medication during the day. But parents cannot be allowed to wait on the school compound. They are free to wait outside the compound or at a venue next to the school for easy access. What should be done in the event there is an interruption in the supply of electricity? Students should be instructed to close scripts and remain seated. The time is recorded in the compensatory time of task form. The school supervisor should be contacted as well as there are hotline numbers to be utilized. Once the situation is rectified, the students are to continue as usual with compensatory time given back. This situation should be documented in the irregularity report as well. If all the students have finished an assessment before time, can scripts be taken up? No, the students must be encouraged to peruse the scripts and check over till the full time has passed, even though everyone would have finished before time. All exams must be able to run in its entirety, meaning 50 whole minutes or 75 whole minutes. If a child's information is wrong on the attendance register, the stickers and admission slip, what should be filled out on the front cover of the script? The information that is contained on the attendance register and on the admission slip, that is what should be utilized, even though it may be incorrect. This information will be rectified after the marking of the assessment. Should a child be used as a witness to the opening of the scripts? No witnesses should be the assistant assessment supervisor and the testers. Even though the CXC packaging has a section for the student to sign, this is not required from SCA students. It is simply a generic packaging that CXC utilizes for both their CSEC, CAPE, and SCA, which requires the secondary school students to sign, but not our primary school students. Is there a dress code for persons involved in the test administration? Persons should be dressed in a moderate manner similar to casual business attire. Avoid revealing attire and footwear which makes excessive noise. The Supervisors and Testers Manual 2020 can be accessed using the following link. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me, Ms. Bagelu, at the DERE, and you can use either of the numbers and the email that was given. Thank you for viewing the SCA Test Administration 2020 guidelines. Notwithstanding the detailed instruction given in this presentation, you are advised to refer to the Supervisors and Testers Manual for clarification on any issues. Ensure that you are cognizant of all aspects of the SCA test administration. Thank you for viewing.